you want to learn more about effective management, head over to mattsingers.com and sign up for my free management training.
Welcome to the Mad Singers Management Podcast from madsingers.com, where entrepreneurs and business managers learn and share. If you like the show, don't forget to leave a review.
Hello, and welcome back to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Today I'm joined by Paul Turner. Welcome, Paul.
Welcome, Mads. Thank you for offering me the opportunity.
I am super excited for today's episode, but before we jump into it, would you mind giving the audience a little bit of background on who you are and how you ended up where you are right now?
Well, my background's not your average social entrepreneur or business background, in the sense that at the age of 19, I actually became a monk. So for the next 14 years, I focused on discipline, building self-confidence, mind control, sense control, and purifying my whole life and sort of diving into the spiritual aspect of life. And during that process, though, I wasn't your average monk, because during that time I learned how to use a computer, I learned graphic design, I taught myself how to build websites, and I was also taught myself public relations work, because my first service as a monk was feeding the needy people. That was one of the outreach programs that the ashram was conducting. So I learned how to cook for large quantities of people, and I would, serve the needy in Sydney, Australia. And I realized that there was great potential in that project, not only in filling bellies, but in communicating a message of love and respect. So I started to dive into the hospitality, the spiritual hospitality culture of India, because this ashram, the spiritual path that I came from has roots in India. So there's a spiritual hospitality culture. And in that culture, it's very common for people to accept the fact that we're more than simply just a body. There's a spiritual energy. And even it's not uncommon for like a tradesman, like a carpenter on the street, before he starts the day, he would actually worship his tools, understanding that energy in the form of those tools is a blessing of God. So they actually worship the tools, which is pretty far out. So it's very common for most people in India, in that culture, to understand that there's a spiritual side, that we're more than simply a physical form, and that there's a sense of equality. We're all energetically equal. So that one of the ways that they express that understanding is through the sharing of food. So if you go to any temple in India, it's very common that it happens all the time, that you would actually get a freshly prepared meal, any visitor, any random stranger. And the same thing would happen with people visiting your house. So there's a concept called Atithi Narayan. So Atithi means, it's a Sanskrit word, and it means unscheduled, and Narayan is a name for God. And so the Atithi Narayan is the unscheduled guest, should be treated like God. So obviously you would sit them down, give them a glass of water, feed them, and so on. So in researching that spiritual hospitality culture, I realized that there was a tremendous opportunity to communicate that message, to use food as a way to communicate, to bring people together, to address the root causes of social ills. And through that experience, that led me into social entrepreneurship. So I actually ended up setting up a non-profit called Food for Life Global in the United States. I left Australia. And then soon after that, when I got married, I realized, I have to make money. So my natural tendency was to be a social entrepreneur, because my foundations are all about giving back and helping the community and making the world a better place and so on. And so social entrepreneurship became my guiding light. And so I've started many social entrepreneur endeavors. My latest one is called the Om Guarantee Certification Project, where it's a service of certifying social good. So companies that want to give back can actually certify their social good and record that transaction in the blockchain. So that's called the Om Guarantee Certification. And then more recently, I got together with a bunch of my friends and the charity itself as a co-creator, and we created a crypto project called the Kindly Ecosystem. And the purpose of the Kindly Ecosystem is to make it easy for anyone to be kind. So all of the financial products that this company will produce the crypto financial products, tokens and exchanges and wallets and debit cards will all come with embedded with social impact. So essentially what we want to do is make it easy for everyone to be kind just by using those products. So that's where I am today. And then 7 years back, during my travels of developing the charity work, I ended up in Colombia, the Andes Mountains of Colombia. And I married a Colombian woman, and she runs an animal sanctuary. And so that is another whole experience right there. It's like living in the Andes Mountains with 200 animals, rescued animals.
Sounds fantastic. Sounds fantastic. And yeah, definitely a very unusual route to entrepreneurship.
Yeah, very different.
Excellent. So you mentioned you've been running a few different social entrepreneurships. What is the difference, just for the audience who isn't aware of it? So what's the difference between a regular entrepreneurship and a social one?
Well, a typical business, when people get into business, they think, I need to make some money. I've got to pay the bills. I want to break out. I don't want to work a regular job. It's just all about meeting the bottom line. Like, if I can make $1,000 this week, I can pay my bills and this and that. So the focus is about making money. Whereas with a social entrepreneurship, a social enterprise, the focus is not making money. The focus is on social impact, is on making a positive difference in the world, and money simply follows. So the philosophy is that if you follow your passion, if you put your heart into something, the money will come, the energy will flow to you. That energy in the form of money will flow to you. So there's a different mindset between a regular entrepreneur and a social entrepreneur. And in the case of like the Om Guarantee Certification Project and the Kindly Ecosystem, they're purpose-driven organizations. They're not money-driven, they're purpose-driven. So there's a purpose, and every decision we make has to align with that purpose of making it easy for people to be kind, encouraging kindness in the world, cultivating kindness in the world. And the bottom line is that this is really where business is going. I was just on a call today with Spiral Bank. Spiral Bank is a new giving bank. It's literally the world's first giving bank. And so they have, their philosophy is that everyone should give back. And so they actually they mandate that everyone that sets up an account with them have to give back to charity some percentage of their income. And it can start at 0.25%, which is not much. And you can decide how much you want to give back. So they literally they'll have a debit account, a savings account, and then a giving account. And then the individual account holders can choose the charity or the social impact they want to make. And every month, a certain amount of money goes to these charity partners on their system. So it's quite unique. It's really beautiful. And there's an example there of a purpose-driven bank, which is, when you think about it, is very unusual, because when we think of banks, we think of greed and selfishness and, massive control and influence. And this is turning the financial industry on its head, so to speak, focusing on giving and allowing the money to flow. And they're doing really well. They're growing very fast. It's a new bank, but they're growing very, very fast. So that's one example. And so that's just basically the difference there, is that the mentality. What legacy do you want to leave? Do you want to make $10 million and just buy things? Or do you want to help 10 million people and leave a legacy of positivity and love and respect and so on? Because ultimately, you can't take that money with you. When we die, we don't take anything with us but our wisdom and our spiritual credits. Yep. So a social entrepreneur, a purpose-driven organization, is focused on that legacy.
Interesting. And yeah, interesting. You have also bumped into the blockchain and so on. I actually had the opportunity to look a little bit at the project and so on. It looks super interesting. So what made you sort of jump on the blockchain thing in the first place?
Well, I recognized it as the future of business, because the world that we live in now is really not a democracy. It's a corporatocracy, a technocracy, where the corporations and the technologies of the world are controlling everything. Not only do they control the flow of money, but they control policy. And we all know very well that 99.9% of all the politicians, the leaders of the world, are compromised, by these corporations. They're bought out, and it's as clear as day now, and it's more so now than it has ever been because of the internet, because of the ability to research and dig down and do, find out what's really going on. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that was much more difficult, but now you have Google. So blockchain is part of that evolution, wherein it enables the individual to get back that power. Because right now, if you and I want to make a transaction, we have to go through MasterCard, Visa, or so many different financial entities in order for the money to reach you. And then along the way, they take their piece of the pie. With crypto, it's direct, it's peer-to-peer. I can literally do business with you and no one's in the middle. And that's revolutionary because it puts the power back in the hands of the individual rather than in the hands of the big banks. So there's no doubt in my mind that blockchain is the future of the foundation of all new technologies that will go forth. And crypto is simply an extension of that. It's just a new way of doing business, which is more cost efficient, faster. There's another company that recently launched called StrikeMe, STRIKE.me. And what they're doing is they're revolutionizing the peer-to-peer giving. Like most of us are aware of things like Western Union and say TransferWise or PayPal, right? And they have their benefits. They work, but ultimately they're still using the traditional financial systems. So what StrikeMe is doing is they're using blockchain to transfer money around the world. And blockchain's a very well-established, decentralized network. So literally you can go onto StrikeMe and say, I want to send money to you, someone in, you're in Denmark, right? I want to send money to you and I want you to receive it in Denmark currency. I can literally and I'm in Colombia right now, I can convert my Colombian peso to Bitcoin. The money is instantly transferred to your account in Denmark, and then you can receive it in Denmark currency within minutes. And that's revolutionary. So, there's technologies like that are paving the way for the future, and there's no doubt that they're here to stay.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I mean, I've lived all around the world for a long time, and definitely, I mean, a lot of progress, even before blockchain, a lot of progress have happened in the last 3, 4, 5 years, right? Something like TransferWise, for example, have definitely made life a lot easier. But yeah, you're right. I mean, sometimes, particularly in dealing with US, right? Like sometimes when you make a transfer to the US, it takes a couple of days, and it's crazy nowadays that something that simple takes that much time, right?
It's like, I want to just give you some money. I want to help a friend. Here's $20, to pay for your electricity bill or whatever. The only way for that to be efficient is using blockchain technology and cryptocurrency.
Yeah, and I mean, so two benefits I see from it is one is it's super more efficiency, but it's also how it's actually pushing the traditional banks, because I think a lot of banks have started to woke up and see, well, actually we can't spend a week transferring money from US to China or whatever.
They're playing catch up. And you'll see that all the big banks, they're all, if they haven't publicly admitted it, they're all dipping their toes in crypto. They're buying up Bitcoin. They understand this is the future. So a lot of people don't admit it. A lot of institutions don't admit it, but they have their investments in Bitcoin, in Ethereum, and the bigger cryptocurrencies, more established cryptocurrencies of the world.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Very interesting. So, Paul, you mentioned something as well that I find super interesting, which was about mind control and managing your mind and sense control and so on. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like, if we start with the mind and confidence and so on, if the different entrepreneurs sitting listening here, like, what is some useful tips and tricks and so on they can use when it comes to their mind?
Yeah, the mind is, a mysterious force. And that's the thing you have to understand right out the gate, is that the mind is not you. It's a different energy. It's a tool that we use to navigate this material world. So that's one of the first things I learned when I became a monk. because you can imagine at the age of 19, practicing celibacy is no joke, right? So you really have to learn to control your mind and senses if you want to be sincere in that path. So we lived very simply. I slept on the floor. I didn't sleep on a bed for those years. I slept in a sleeping bag on the floor. I often didn't even use a pillow. I used my hands. I ate at regulated times. We had, very regulated lifestyle, eating, sleeping, recreation, and so on. And all of those things help to manage the mind. The mind you have to see as like a mischievous child. And in order to rein in a mischievous child or a puppy dog, you have to create boundaries. You constantly have to monitor the little puppy dog or the little child, because you don't know what they're going to get into. They're going to stick their finger in the electrical socket or whatever. So that's sort of the approach you have to take once you understand that you are not the mind. The mind is just a tool. It's not you. One way to understand the difference is like this. This is the analogy I give. Say you're on top of a big building and you're looking over the edge of that building and you're looking down and you're 50 stories up. So the natural inclination of the mind is to say, oh, I wonder what it would be like to jump. I wonder what it would be like to be like a bird and just sort of fly, and fly through the sky. That's the mind. The intelligence then kicks in and says, that's crazy. You're not a bird. You don't have feathers. And if you jump, you're going to die, and you've got children to support. So there's a conversation going on between the mind and the intelligence. The mind is the problem solver. The intelligence is a decision maker. It's a lot more like a computer. Yes, no, yes, no. That's a good idea. That's a bad idea. It's analyzing. It's analytical. But there's something or some phenomena is witnessing that conversation. That's the soul. The soul is witnessing that conversation. So there's a third energy, and that's the presence of the soul. So the soul is what's animating the physical form. The soul is a seat of consciousness. So when we die, everything is present in a dead body except the presence of the soul. The heart is still there, the lungs, the blood, the brain, but something is missing that has stopped the body being animated or being able to communicate, and that is the soul. That's a different type. It's a very, very subtle energy, the finest of all energies, and that's ultimately the source of who we really are as our real identity, our real self. And so once we understand these different energies, that there's a physical form that we're animating, which is enabling us to fulfill certain desires and have certain physical experiences as we navigate through this material world in order to evolve our consciousness. Once we understand that difference, then it becomes easier to manage the mind, to understand that the mind can be our best friend. It can either be our worst enemy or our best friend. And it takes discipline. So in a famous spiritual book from India called the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is talking to his friend Arjuna, and Arjuna is a great warrior. And they're just about to, there's a great battle just about to take place. And Arjuna is saying, I can't do this. This is difficult. I don't do that. And Krishna is telling him, you have to fight because you have to fight to protect religious principles. And my mind is reeling. I can't, I'm feeling confused here. And Krishna said to him that the mind is like the wind. It's very difficult to control the wind, but you can with practice. So the mind is a very difficult thing to control, but you can, through discipline and regulation, you can start to reel it in and make it your best friend. And that's important if you want to be successful in life, not just in business, to make that distinction, to understand that we use the mind as a tool to navigate this world, to solve problems, to think outside the box. And then we use the intelligence to analyze those ideas. And then as a soul, as the host of the body, we then go forward, down this path or that path.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I've never thought about it like that, because I think most people think of intelligence and the mind being kind of the same thing. But
Same thing. It's not.
that
According
makes a
to
lot
the
of sense.
ancient, many spiritual traditions, there are 8 material energies, and it's earth, water, fire, air, and ether. So they're the gross energies. Obviously, the ether is very subtle. Ether's like the subtle energies. Then the more higher than that is the mind, and then even finer than that is the intelligence. And then the finer than that is the ego, the false, what's called the false ego, which is where we identify with the physical form. But above them all is the soul. So there are 8 material energies which make up everything that we see manifested in this material world: earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. So the idea of self-development or self-realization is to get beyond the false ego, stop identifying with this physical form, and start identifying with your true self within. So that requires practice, that requires purification, that requires controlling the senses and going deep. Because right now our consciousness is tuned into this physical form. We can see our brain as like a computer or a radio, and based on our level of consciousness, we're tuned into a particular frequency. So as you purify your senses, control the mind, and practice meditation and so on, you can literally change that frequency that the brain is tuning into, and you can tune into higher frequencies and get a better understanding of the world that we live in.
That makes a lot of sense. So, in terms of confidence specifically, like, what are some of the things that you go around like doing to sort of improve your confidence, knowing that?
Well, I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Soul Power, The 5 Noble Truths. And in that book, I take a different approach to, it's a book about affirmations, but it's a book approaching this idea of self-empowerment and confidence from a spiritual perspective. Because typically when you hear people talking about confidence, it's like, it's all rah, 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 just get out of bed, take a cold shower, just man up, and it's very, very external, and it doesn't have a lot of, it's coming from the perspective of physicality, that we're a physical form and we shouldn't be lazy. But if you change that perspective and understand that you are a spirit soul, you are energetically, qualitatively like God, but just very small. And the soul itself is what is animating this physical form. If you start to look at yourself from that perspective, then you can draw from those godly qualities, which are natural to you. We literally have the same qualities as God, we're just in a smaller capacity. And it's similar to a drop of the ocean has the same qualities as the entire ocean. It's no difference. It's the same quality. You take a drop of the ocean, put it under a microscope, it's the same thing as the entire ocean. So similarly, we as souls, we are qualitatively like God. We're godly in nature. And as a godly person, as a godly entity, we are very confident. We should feel confident because we have power. We have spiritual power. First of all, we can't die. Energy can't be destroyed. And that's a fact in even basic mundane physics, that energy it cannot be destroyed. It just changes shape. So that's the same in the spiritual world. We are a form of energy that also can't be destroyed. So we never die. Death is an illusion. When you die, you're simply just changing, you're just moving into a different realm or moving into a different body. We're just moving. We're constantly moving. So once you understand your godly nature and that you are eternal and that you have, you're the child of the most prosperous, most grand, most perfect personality, if you believe in a personal form of God. If you don't, that's fine too, because you could say that, well, I'm part of the universe, and the universe is eternal as well. But once you understand that godly nature, then you should be confident. The natural result of that would be amazing confidence. So when you go into competition and you shake someone's hand and you look them in the eye, you look at them as a soul, and you present yourself as something more than simply a physical form. And when you have that mentality, that perspective, when you speak the simplest words, it can have profound effect on people because you're speaking from a source of true wisdom. So that can give you great confidence. And I actually wrote about this in another book I wrote called The Yoga of Pool, because I used to teach billiards, and I wrote a book on how to play pool. But in the part where I talk about sports psychology, introduce sports psychology, rather than just talking about the traditional sort of sports psychology lingo, I drew from my roots as a monk, and I introduced concepts from the ancient spiritual scriptures within the context of playing pool. And as a result of that, it's a very unique sort of approach to that subject for that industry, and it's one of the best-selling books in the billiards industry to this day.
Interesting.
It's quite different, because even any sporting competition, you'll know who the winner is right at the beginning. When two boxers are facing off, they're looking at each other in the eye, and they're sensing the confidence level. It's all about confidence. 90% of success in any sporting event is mentality. If you have a winning mentality and you're confident and you know you can win, you're 90% there. So that same thing can even be in passive sports like billiards or ping pong. If you have confidence, and when you approach that competitor with confidence, that can deflate their confidence and put them on the back foot, and you can win, even if you don't have as good a skills.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. I've looked at confidence a little bit differently. So the way I typically look at confidence is saying that I think a lot of time what you said, sort of the typical analogy that most people look at it and how they see it is this rah, all that stuff. The way I've looked at it is basically confidence is showing ourselves what we're capable of doing, because I think for a lot of people have a lot of self-doubt. There are a lot of like, oh, can I really do this? Is this really my thing? And so on. Whereas I see it very much as confidence is really just showing yourself what you're capable of doing. And that's how I've looked at confidence for many years, right? So it's not about proving things to other people. It's actually about proving to yourself what you're capable of.
Yeah, believing in yourself. If you have this understanding that you're an amazing, powerful spiritual being, when you go into any physical combat or material challenge, you're going to draw from that understanding, from that perspective, and you're going to have supreme confidence, because you're going to think, well, I can't be hurt. I can't be hurt. Whatever happens, it's a physical body. I'm greater than this physical body. I'll do what I can with this physical form, with the tools that I have. But myself, I can't be beaten, because I'm perfect and complete as I am. Even if I am missing a finger, or I actually missing one finger here. When I was 16, I lost top of my finger. So I feel 100%, although I'm 99%. I'm not physically not complete.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, so the way I noticed it early on in my life was I started traveling, and I moved to a foreign country already when I was 18. And one of the things that I noticed pretty early on was I gained the confidence from showing myself I could do it. And at some point I was like, you can take everything I own, everything I have, and you can drop me in a random country somewhere on planet Earth, and I'm confident that I will figure out how to build a life. Like I was confident that, even if I'm in somewhere I don't speak the language, even if I'm somewhere where there isn't a lot of resources, like I would find a way to live a good life, right? And I think that was what I thought about a lot when I started thinking about confidence, and because I think I've always had it, but I've just never understood when I was younger why I was confident. But I think a lot of it was exactly as I was saying, like proving to myself that I am capable of doing things. And a lot of the time, I see many people are like, oh, I'm going to go to the gym next week and stuff like that. And people tell themselves a lot of things that they then don't follow through on. And I believe that every time you do that, you're showing yourself that you can't trust yourself.
Right.
and I think that's probably what brings down confidence rather than building it up.
Yeah, and you've also got to like overcome fear. And so what happens with confidence, it's a quality that has to be cultivated, because even though, fair enough, from the spiritual perspective, we should be confident. if you understand you're a spiritual being. But obviously that takes time to cultivate even that understanding, because we're so conditioned, from birth. You are Billy Smith, and you're an Australian, and you have this color, and this is who you are, and these are your parents, and so we're programmed from the beginning that this physical form is our identity. And obviously, it's just a vehicle that we use to express ourselves as souls. So fear is the biggest challenge when it comes to confidence, and the only way to overcome that is to face your fears. To put yourself in situations like you're just talking about, where if you're thrown into a country where you can't speak the language, and just overcoming that fear, and that then breeds confidence, which then breeds more confidence. It's a self-fulfilling thing. As you get a little bit of confidence, that can feed into the further confidence. So you've got the initial stage is overcoming fear, taking the risk and facing your fears, and seeing, sort of playing out your full potential, not limiting yourself. And this again comes back to the mind, because the mind will convince us otherwise. The mind will say, oh, you're not good enough. Oh, you're too fat, you're too thin, you're not fast. That's the mind. But we have to then use the intelligence and analyze, rationally, is that really the truth, or is that just the mind speaking nonsense? And so it all ties in. So if we have that spiritual understanding, if we understand that we are not the mind, if we're ready to take a risk and cultivate confidence, then you can be like a super confident, super successful person. And
I think all business is a lot like that, right? Like businesses, when you start a company for the first time, with whichever shape or form, like there's so much stuff you don't know, right? There's so many things to overcome, and there's so much stuff where you just have to go at it, and you have to go at it knowing that you don't know what you're doing, knowing that
figuring it out.
you need to figure it out along the way. And like the
to.
first time you hire someone, the first time you, I don't know, launch a new product or whatever you're doing, right? Like it's all a new thing, and you're gonna make mistakes, and you're gonna figure it out. If you keep at it, you'll find
You're
a
gonna
way.
try. My dad would say he certainly wasn't a source of wisdom, my dad. But at least one thing I remember him saying is you got to have a go, son. You got to have a go. You got to try. So I remember that. So you just got to try. You don't know. And most successful entrepreneurs, we're talking like even the biggest of them all, they don't have all the answers right out the gate. They're figuring it out as they go along. And that's just part of the process. It's part of self-realization. It's part of building up your character.
Yeah, super interesting. What about the sense control you mentioned?
Well, the senses are like, you can think of the mind as like the king of the senses, and the senses are like the what do you call it, the citizens, right? So one thing to understand here is that when you get the senses under control, when you get the citizens all working together as one, you can actually override the mind. Similarly, just like in civil society, if people unite as one voice and don't play into this foolish narrative that we're all, independent, we're all like, we're not connected, we're not united, well, I'm this color, you're that color, or I'm this culture, that all this nonsense narrative which is dividing us. Yes, there's differences, but there should be unity in diversity. So we embrace the diversity because we're all very different. Just like when you go to a flower, like a forest or a garden, there's so many flowers, but the total, blanket of flowers makes a beautiful mosaic, makes a beautiful picture, right? And we call it a garden. So similarly, if the citizens of the world united, we could overthrow these governments. We could kick out all these corrupt politicians and install actual real quality leadership. And in the same way, when we learn to control the senses, beginning with regulating them, we can start to reel in the mind, which is the king of the senses. So one of the things we learn as monks is it's important to control the tongue. And the tongue is considered to be the most voracious of all the senses. And the tongue has two qualities, tasting and vibrating. So what you speak, the vibrations that you make with your tongue really do impact your consciousness, the way you perceive the world, your behaviors and so on. They mold the way you perceive the world. Similarly, what you eat, the food that you put on your tongue will also impact your consciousness negatively or positively. So we were very careful about the type of food that we ate. We only ate a vegetarian diet, so we avoided foods which were came from violence or anger or suffering or pain. So we ate down the food chain and ate foods which were less, cultivated with less violence, more clean, pure energy, and so on. And similarly, we also learned to control our tongue, the vibration of our tongue, the words we spoke, only speaking the truth, only speaking words which are uplifting and encouraging to others, speaking affirmations, chanting mantras, prayers. All of these things raise our consciousness. They change the way we perceive the world. So that's one of the senses, controlling the tongue through managing the vibration and the tasting. And then the other senses, what you're looking at, what you're hearing, all of these things you're bringing in energy, you're bringing in influences which can impact the consciousness negatively or positively, and at the same time can pollute the mind or purify the mind. So it was, as monks, it was all about purifying the senses, purifying the mind, purifying the consciousness, because the more pure your thoughts are, the more focused you are, the better chance you have at tapping into the higher spiritual frequencies and getting an understanding of your true self-realization.
Yep, that totally makes sense. Excellent, Paul. I think that was very, very interesting. So if people want to know more about yourself or your projects and so on, what's the best place to do so?
I have most of my social media is Paul Rod Turner. My website is paulrodneyturner.com. The charity I direct, Food for Life Global, is ffl.org. And the crypto project is kindlycoin.com if they want to learn about the crypto project, the idea of the kindly ecosystem, promoting kindness. And the other social enterprise is the Om Guarantee project, which is omguarantee.com. OM, like Om, like the spiritual sound.
Yeah. Perfect. And just here at the end, any resources or anything you'd recommend to people in the entrepreneurial journey to help improve?
Yeah, so there's one thing I came across more recently, about a year ago. I'm trying to think of the name. It's a gentleman. I can't remember his name, but you can look up Story Brand, and it's all about. Yeah, do you remember his name? What I'm talking about?
I probably don't, but
Story Brand. So Story Brand is a very interesting approach to developing your business. It really gets to the heart of what motivates you, what makes you happy, what excites you, and he basically runs you through a process of telling your personal story, telling the story of your brand. And I feel like that's invaluable, because most companies start off with very vague sort of missions and goals. It's just, we identified a way to make money, and that's it. Like we can buy something for $1 and sell it for 10, and let's go for it. And they sort of miss out in what really drives a successful company, because every successful company that you'll see in the world today, they all have a very clearly defined mission, vision, story. And so it's important to get to the story, find out what your story is if you want to be successful. So that's a great resource. The Story Brand, they can check that up. I can't remember the gentleman's name. Did you find
Donald Miller?
Donald Miller, yeah, exactly. Other than that, don't forget as I've been mentioning, don't forget the spiritual side of life. If you just focus on the physicality, the physical side of the world, you're going to miss out, because at the end of life, we don't know when that's going to come. If you're not nourished on a spiritual level, you're never going to be satisfied. It doesn't matter if you have all the best cars and the yachts and everything else. If you're not spiritually nourished, you're not nourishing your soul. If you're not purpose driven, you're not doing something to leave a legacy, a positive legacy in the world, you're never going to be happy.
Totally. That was fantastic last words, Paul. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Mads. It's a great pleasure.
And to the audience, thank you very much for listening all the way to the end. We'll be back again next week.
Thank you for listening to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Please leave a review. It means the world to us. You can also learn more about management at madsingers.com.